let's just jump in. We have a short time together. We have a lot of content. We have some great panelists here. So I'd love to welcome everybody to our online event. I hope that everybody had a good and also boring Black Friday, Cyber Monday holiday event. I say good because I hope everybody hit their numbers and sales were record-breaking, but I also say boring because I hope all of your sites stayed up without any drama. But if you're here, you're already thinking about how to make next year's Black Friday even better. So we're in really great company today. I'm here with the experts. We're joined by Malte, CTO of Vercel, former director of Google Search, and before that, built online stores for top fashion houses like YSL, Stella McCartney, and Alexander McQueen. And Matt Jared, sales engineer at Vercel, works with our top e-commerce customers like Helly Hansen. And I'm Alina Weinstein. I'm a solutions product marketer at Vercel. I'll be moderating the session today. So let's dive in. We're going to cover Black Friday, Cyber Monday recap. So we want to hear from you. What are you looking to improve on and why? Why performance is so important? How your architecture could actually be hindering your performance? Getting ahead of next year's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and the steps that you can take today to have a successful Black Friday next year. Why Next.js and Vercel are the preferred combo for top retailers. And we'll leave some time at the end for live Q&A. So this is your time to ask any burning questions. So please use the Q&A poll when that goes live so we can make sure to answer them. Okay, so we have a first poll question. And we want to hear from you on what's top of mind. So I would love to know, what are you making big investments in for next year? What's the most important thing that your team is looking to improve on? We'll just wait for those to trickle in. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is most people at 43% are actually looking for a more flexible architecture. Then that's followed by 36% at personalization, 43% at site performance, and 11% at handling traffic surges. Okay, well, so what we see actually at Vercel is that many of our customers are within the retail category. And what we typically see is when we work with customers within e-commerce is that they generally come to us with issues in those four categories. So the inability to handle traffic surges, poor site performance, they're not able to personalize their site, or they have really inflexible architecture, which limits them from responding or making really fast changes. So Malte, I'd love to understand from you, when companies miss their goals and it falls into those four buckets, can you give us an overview of why?
Totally. Yeah. To me, these buckets are actually not completely independent. And in a way, it's downstream from the inflexible architecture that we often find ourselves in, right? And so because we have business goals and we have strategies to advance those business goals. And for example, we might be saying, okay, we need to implement personalization in order to have, a better conversion rate. But now we find that the flexible architecture or inflexible architecture makes us not able to implement the personalization in a way that's actually good from user experience perspective. That then leads to poor performance and makes it more difficult to handle traffic surges. So these are actually kind of connected. But on the other hand, if I have a more flexible architecture, I might be able to still, get the personalization goal that I have out of the site, but do it in a way that doesn't negatively impact site performance.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about site performance for a second. Deloitte did a study on how improvements in mobile site speed positively affect a brand's bottom line. And what they found was that with a 1 millisecond improvement in site speed, retail consumers spent almost 10% more. So in other words, milliseconds translate into millions of dollars. What they also found was that 70% of consumers admit that page speed impacts their willingness to buy. And in the US, latency is a #1 reason why consumers decide to abandon mobile sites. So I want to share some other info with you as well. The National Retail Federation, or NRF, estimates that on this past Black Friday, Cyber Monday, there were 197 million shoppers. This is the second highest number in the survey's history after last year's record of 200 million, and it surpassed its initial expectations of 183 million shoppers. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a huge opportunity to get in front of shoppers. That number is only increasing. And if your site is slow, you might fall behind. So I want to open it up to the audience for another poll question and ask how your site is performing. And while the results are coming in, Malta, I would love for you to talk to us about performance. What types of things did you see when customers made site improvements?
Yeah, first of all, one thing we didn't mention in the intro, when I was at Google, my team actually launched the Core Vitals standard and the search ranking like factor through Core Vitals. And obviously, as part of that research of determining what the metrics are and what the impact are, is we just did a bunch of research of what the overall impact is. So there's a really interesting SEO angle. Actually, one thing that's a little bit funny is that there's this lawsuit against Google that led them to release all these search ranking factors, and which I love it because it allows me to talk about a little bit more openly about how this works. And so one of the little known things is that is now well known, but I think people haven't quite ingrained this yet, is that bounce rate from search is actually a major ranking factor. So if someone clicks through from Google and they go to your site and the site loads slowly and they immediately come back, Google says, okay, I clearly guided this user to the wrong direction because they were going to buy this t-shirt and now they come back after 10 seconds because the site didn't reload. I'm not going to put that t-shirt back up in the ranking, right? And so there's this, much more indirect impact that folks don't realize. What we actually see with our customers is that lots of folks actually come from, and I don't want to even sugarcoat it, a really, really bad performance situation. Um, I think what we consider a good LCP is about 2.5 seconds. I see like 8 seconds all the time. 4, 5, 6, 8. That's such a major improvement that if you actually get from like pretty horrible to good, you will just see dramatic performance improvements. On the other hand, if you're already optimized, that's kind of coming down to the millisecond make millions part, is that there's always that marginal user who you are currently not converting. And they're the ones who, in the end, because they're for free, they're already, you paid for them or they clicked on search, but they're not converting. And so getting these people who are on your site to actually become purchase customers is a really big deal.
So I love that you're mentioning bounce rate because, when we're thinking about performance, we're not just thinking about just your site being fast, but I'd imagine that would have a huge impact if you're running ads and you're spending a lot of money driving a ton of users to your site. And then, you're seeing them bounce at high rates. So that would be really difficult for a lot of our users. I want to check back into the poll questions and just give a readout on how everybody answered this question. So 43% of you said that there's room for improvement on performance. We hit our Black Friday, Cyber Monday targets, but there are still ways that we can optimize site performance. So 48% of you answered that question. And then 10% answered extremely well. We had a great Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So congrats for those of you who answered. Super happy for everybody that had good site performance. You must already be Vercel customers. But for everybody else, the good news is that doesn't have to be the case for next year. So one of the main things that we've seen with site performance is that you can't quite get performance tuned exactly how you'd want to on a monolith. So I want to open it up to Matt to talk about the difference between monolithic and headless architecture.
For sure. Thanks, Elena. I think the biggest kind of headline here that we can talk about when we go between headless and monolith is a story of control and a story of flexibility. On the monolith side, what we're looking at is an area where we're not going to have as much control. What we're going to look at is kind of a big ball of tape, where that big ball of tape can get us out the door. We can kind of start things. We can do something from 0 to 1, and it's really good. But once we want to go from 1 to 1,000 or 100,000 or 100 million, that's when the issues start to come in. Where the monolith, the kind of the technical overview of this is that we're going to have all of our front end, our back end, our systems, whatever it might be in terms of content, whatever it might be in terms of analytics, whatever it might be in terms of integrations, are all going to run through one service. And that one service may or may not have the absolute best in the world of certain things. And it certainly is not going to have the best in the world in terms of the front end development workflow and in terms of getting our site into front end users' hands as fast as possible. The other side of this is when we go to headless, what we're going to do is we're going to break out these individual pieces and take control of everything. So when we take control of everything, that puts power in our hands. And the way that we're going to take control of that and still have a touch point into our other systems on our back end, so such as our content management, such as our analytics, our PIM, our inventory management, whatever it might be, all sorts of different stuff, all of that's going to be run through APIs. And what we've done is we've gone from relying on one system to rule everything, where we hope that it's going to work, to now being in complete control on our side, where our development teams and our organization can run whatever it is that we want to do and optimize all of our different pieces and have the best breed of every single integration that we want to work with and every single tool that we want to do. So again, it goes back to having control over our system and having flexibility in how we want to spend our time and how we want to optimize our experiences. So that's kind of the idea of headless versus monolith. I'd be happy to dig in a little bit more as well, too.
So what I hear you talking about is basically a difference between closed versus open architecture. And it might sound kind of like a cheesy analogy, but your online store is not one size fits all. So why should your tech stack be? I'd love for you to actually just walk us through what headless with Vercel looks like.
For sure. So, and this is the idea here, is what we want to do is, if we go headless, we need to have a head for this. We need to have a connective tissue that's going to, like, again, going back to the control story, we need to have a place where we're going to be able to control our backend systems and our APIs and all of the other systems that we're going to be touching. So with us, the way that we look at it is we start with Next.js, and we start with our front end frameworks. Next.js is an open source framework that we maintain. When we start there, and what we say is, on the Next.js side, I want to have an incredibly fast front end. I want to have an incredibly performant front end. I want it to be really be able to personalize things. I want to have rich interactivity. I want it to be beautiful. I want it to be easy for my development teams to work with. And I need to securely interact with my PIM, with my OMS, with my DAM, whatever it might be. And I need to interact with those ways in a secure way. With Next.js, that gives us that ability right out of the box. So we can say is, I'm going to start with writing a front end framework, and in that front end framework, I'll have the ability to run back end functions that can go talk to my back end systems, and I can have APIs that sort of are the connective tissue between all these pieces. That's incredibly important for security. That's incredibly important for performance. But the other side of this is, we don't have to suffer on the front end. You can build an API layer that connects all these different pieces. If you don't have a really fast front end, then it's all for naught. So the idea with Vercel is that we want to focus on having an extremely fast front end and a secure and performant back end as well. So here's where we're going to connect all of these pieces together on the Vercel side.
So Malte, I'd love to understand from you, why and how does outdated infrastructure and inflexible front ends lead to poor performance and poor ROI?
Yeah, I think if you look at it from a purely technical perspective, the way much of the internet has been working for the last 20 years is that people are saying, okay, I'm going to build this server somewhere, often in Virginia, my favorite place in the world. It's where the original Amazon region is. And then we realize, okay, most humans actually don't live in Virginia, but it doesn't matter. I'm just going to purchase this CDN service, and I'm going to put it in front of it. CDN kind of goes close to user. Maybe there's some caching built in, and that makes us all happy, right? And what happened with that change is that it kind of required us, from an infrastructure perspective, to rely very heavily on caching. But caching is the antithesis of personalization. Personalization requires you to make a copy of your page for the user, right? And so you have this like fundamentally incompatible architecture where you have CDNs that only really work if you cache, personalization that doesn't work in your cache. And so you have to either pick between speed or personalization. With personalization, you go back to Virginia to get a personalized copy of the page, right? And so like I think one of the founding seeds of Vercel was to break open that fundamental misarchitecture of the web where you can say, can I have personalization and speed at the same time? So that's kind of there's other aspects obviously of how data infrastructure kind of interact with things, but I think that's kind of the main kind of thing that you can easily understand where you have this breakage of if you rely on your CDN for speed, you're not going to have good personalization.
And personalization is obviously the goal for a great customer experience, but can even talking about like even more basic customizations, can you give us some examples of some of those customizations that are really hard to do on a monolith?
Totally. I mean, if you rely on a monolith that you've bought shrink wrapped from a vendor, you're beholden to their roadmap, right? And I mean, I think one of the things that's everyone's top of mind now is that, maybe you want to do something with AI, right? My favorite example is that I no longer read reviews. I want an AI to read all the reviews from me and give me like the 5 bullet points from what all the users wrote on one glance, right? Now, maybe you're lucky and your monolith vendor has this on your roadmap for Q1 2025, but maybe they prioritize something else, right? They're just humans and they make their own decisions. And obviously maybe they get your input, but they also get someone else's input. And so now you have to wait for them to put it on their roadmap. But maybe that's a year from now, right? And so I think the beauty of the headless architecture is that you don't have to make these hard calls, right? You can still rely on your vendor as a backend to provide you with valuable services, but you can always just do the thing that you find to be your primary priority for any given time and do it right now.
Yeah, so obviously things like improving cart abandonment is, something that's really top of mind for a lot of our retailers. But even a more basic customization is that you can't even change your own URL structure on a monolith. So I would actually love to understand if you're on a monolith still, what keeps you from migrating? And what are some of the reasons that you're reluctant to change systems? Now, this poll question is short answer, so I'm looking forward to reading through all of your answers. But we work with a lot of e-commerce companies, and so we've heard some of the objections here, which have been that our current system has always worked fine. Migrating to a new platform is too risky and time consuming, or we can't afford downtime during a migration. So Malte, what do you think of these reasons? Are they objections? Do you think that they're misconceptions?
I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge that, migrations are a risk and they may take some time and it's something to be like conscious about and to manage well, right? What we so when we think about migrations at Vercel, it's all about incrementality. So to do as few things as possible at any given time to get you into a much better state and to get you data on how well you're doing, right? And incrementality, so I mean, I have a whole blog post about this. We actually have a lot of documentation as well, but the the way we think about incrementality is actually on 2 layers. So it's both what I would call a horizontal incrementality and vertical incrementalities. For example, if you have right now a monolith e-commerce front end, migrating to headless does not require you to actually migrate away from your monolith. You can keep it and use it as an API. Once you do that, first of all, you already killed 50% or even 80% of the risk. The next thing is once you actually keep your existing system in place, you're not required to change every single page or app within your current application at the same time. You can, for example, only do the checkout process or only do the homepage or only do the P2P or only do the PLP, right? And so by doing one page type at a time, you, first of all, massively reduce the amount of work you need to do. And second of all, you massively reduce the risk because you can experiment on these ones at a time. And your manager who will ask the question, like, how are we doing? You can give them an answer after maybe 3 months rather than doing the whole thing at once in one big bang thing. And so I think once you have this attitude in mind, you are you're already in a place where it's very clear that you're mitigated all the risk. I mean, not all the risk, but like you just substantially reduce risk relative to like a big bang thing. The other thing that I do want to mention is that there are a whole range of accelerators out there. And they can also be a really good way to minimize overall effort and to minimize the risk by kind of starting with best practices from a UI angle. So with incrementality and the accelerators, I think we have two really good tools in our toolbox to like dramatically reduce the time and dramatically reduce the risk as well.
Yeah, I love that. Thinking about breaking it down into chunks and focusing on an incremental migration. But for those that feel like it's still not a good time or they can't do it this year, do you think that the cost of not changing is higher in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, you always have to think about the opportunity cost where you don't do something. So again, like with an incremental process, there is probably never really a good time than to move quickly, right? Because again, like you're not have this like mega project in front of you, but we're really trying to have folks do something that's relatively small to quickly prove out the results of their work.
Yeah, and actually, I wanted to share some research by Commerce Tools. So about 85% of large enterprises use microservice versus monolithic architectures, and over 75% of mid-market companies have made the switch as well. So here at Vercel, we've seen this prevailing wisdom, and what we're seeing is that monoliths are really great for getting started, but as our customers have more needs and want to make more customizations, they start running into these problems and hitting the limits of their architecture.
Yeah,
So
maybe to kind of add a little bit about on top of that, right? Like I think the to make a decision whether it's a good time to make the jump to headless is primarily based on what your own roadmap is. Like if you literally don't want to change anything about your website over the next 12 months, sure, like maybe you shouldn't change anything, in fact, right? But you probably actually do have a roadmap. And what we see is that because with like a modern system like Next.js and Vercel, you can so dramatically improve your iteration velocity that there is actually a really good case that you just win back the time that you were going to use on those other projects very, very quickly, right? So amortization time can be measured in months.
yeah, I think that's actually a perfect segue talking about iteration velocity. I would actually love for you, Matt, to tell us about Vercel and where we fit into this architecture.
Absolutely. So, and this all like ties back in perfectly to what Malta was saying was if you want iteration velocity, you have to have a tool that's going to allow you to do that. On a monolith, there's not you can only some monoliths you can only, change 25% of the code base, right? If you want to be able to have development flexibility and the ability to like do stuff, and Malta talked about this a lot, is to be able to do stuff. You can just ship things. Is Malta's my favorite Malta line. And the idea behind that with Vercel, and this is where I like to use the term fast teams. What we care about is really fast teams. The idea here is that we want to give developers information about the application as fast as possible, and we want to give stakeholders information about the application as fast as possible. So on the developer side, what we're looking at here is we want to actually show what's going on with the build log as fast as possible. If you're in a monolith and you can only edit certain pieces and you don't really know what's going on, you're going to put something into a black box and it may or may not work. Right? We have no idea what's going on inside of there. We want to know what's going on in our build time logs. We want to know how our performance is looking. We want to know how our analytics are looking. Things like that. We need to get that information in developers' hands as fast as possible. Our technical teams need that information. The other side of that is confirming that what we're actually building is what our teams actually want. So flip back a slide really quickly now for this piece in the middle here is our preview environments and preview comments. If you're working with a development team and you're a non-technical stakeholder, oftentimes if you're just waiting until something's on production and you're hoping that it's going to work and you're hoping that was built, that's a really, really bad strategy. At Vercel, our idea is that we want to get information into the hands of the development team and to the stakeholder team as fast as possible. And this is where our preview environments come in play. And how this works is what we'll do is we'll provision per commit and per branch. So every single time a developer goes to do work, what we'll do is we'll give them a space that mirrors production. And when that space mirrors production, they can use sample products or they can use production products. They can do example checkout flows. But what they can do is we can actually try and see what things are going to look like before they go to production. We can QA things really, really quickly instead of hoping when we send stuff up to production. So here's the idea on the developer experience platform. So this is the fast teams portion of Vercel. And this is the idea that if we're going to iterate quickly, we need to have information really fast. The other side of this is on the next slide is the managed infrastructure side. And there was a question earlier around, is headless actually going to be faster? What's the difference between all these different pieces? Is it any faster or not? And I'll give an example for one of our customers who is an online auction house. And they have enormous scale for these auctions that take place. And there's a customer story that we can follow up with afterwards. But they have enormous scale for these auctions. And what actually was really great was they started to see a lot of benefit from being on Vercel and having a headless ecosystem or working in the headless ecosystem because they were delivering their sites and their front ends really, really fast. But their backend would sometimes have some inflexibility and sometimes have some issues as they were kind of working it out. But the front end was still available and they could still deliver their site to the front ends. Even if their backend wasn't working, they could have some fallback over there. They would deliver extremely fast sites to people and get information in customers' hands and actually show customers what was going on, even if they couldn't maybe buy that vehicle right now because their backend was having some issues. So here's the idea is having that managed infrastructure and focusing on front end workloads. There's a term here that we call framework-defined infrastructure. I spoke about Next.js earlier. All of our infrastructure is built around the framework of Next.js and the framework of front end, of using front ends. So here's the idea is that we're actually going to be pushing things into the front end and delivering front end workloads really, really, really fast. And that's the idea behind starting to actually have something in our customers' hands first, like Malte talked about earlier, is if I have something on my customers' hands that I can interact with and they can look at what's going on and click around, our bounce rate is going to drop drastically and Google's not going to penalize me for that. So this is kind of the idea is we want to get something in a customer's hands as fast as possible.
So two really important things that you just mentioned are safe deployments on the developer experience side and on the managed infrastructure side. Something that we really like to say here at Vercel is that traffic spikes should be exciting, not scary. And so that's super relevant because for Black Friday, Cyber Monday this year, we actually built a live dashboard showing activity across the platform during that whole weekend. So I wanted to point out that Vercel handled almost 87 billion total requests and almost 2 million requests at peak per second. So that's like all of Houston showing up to your site in the same second. And the last thing is super unique to Vercel because everyone is going into code freezes during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and even well before. But on Vercel, we actually saw almost 2.5 million deployments over the span of those 5 days. And so what that tells us is that people are so confident in our platform that they're actually able to make changes to their sites and they're able to deploy safely. But not only that, but Vercel actually experienced 99.9992% uptime during Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So Malte, I'd love for you to tell us about Vercel's infrastructure. What makes it so resilient that it can handle the demands of a high traffic event like Black Friday, Cyber Monday?
Totally. I don't want to get too technical really in the presentation. I already talked about kind of the step change in architecture that goes from this idea of centralized monolith plus CDN into a system that's designed for dynamic delivery worldwide, right? And it's also another, there's a similar change from, you guys might have heard about something called Jamstack architecture. And it was also just derived on that mindset where you have effectively a static page and have it cache delivered, but then do personalization on the client, right? So our whole thing is to say, we don't want to make this compromise. We want to be able to do dynamic delivery worldwide, and that requires having compute worldwide directly close to users on the edge and being able to scale at that point. Then finally, the last point is we have invested massively in security. In particular, when it comes to DDoS mitigation, we're actually releasing an announcement today. Might actually be out or it's coming next hours for something that we have already engaged on the last Black Friday, Cyber Monday, which is that we've updated our firewall to be over 40 times faster. And it was already probably the fastest in the industry. So what that means is that whenever you get a traffic spike, you like the classic DDoS mitigation will try to observe the traffic and see, okay, it's malicious, okay, we block, right? But what we see a lot is that people are already down by the time that the firewall gets to catch up and say, okay, it's malicious. And so that's why we've been investing in just getting the time from there's something that looks like an attack to us being able to identify it and block it to be as small as possible and measure it in single digit second territory, and sometimes even in milliseconds.
Okay, I know we don't want to get too much into the weeds on every piece of this, but I do think it's super important for us to touch a little bit more on function failover regions and what that means specifically for our customers. Like, how can they place trust in us? Like, what is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this actually, I mean, it's an interesting feature in that it came as a direct customer request as we were doing Black Friday readiness with our customers in the summer of last year. So, as part of that, our customers were kind of brainstorming with us, like, what's something that we can improve? And so, what's available on Vercel is, first of all our compute runs in multi-availability zone configuration. So that means that if the data center that your function is be executing in has any type of problem, it could be a networking issue, it could be a power issue, could be anything you could imagine, right? A pigeon eating through a cable. That is not a problem because there is a completely physically separated, fully separate infrastructure compute unit that's just absolutely waiting to take over. Now, some of our very paranoid customers are saying, okay, I understand it's fully separate infrastructure, but it's both in Virginia. And so that means it could both be impacted by the same hurricane, for example, right? And so that's why we support by default function failover regions. So you can say, okay, shouldn't always use the Virginia example. Let's say my default region is Frankfurt, right? Which is because that's where my database is. I want to have everything in Europe, right? Now, how about there's an issue in Frankfurt? Can I completely fail over to Paris, right? It's just one example. And so that's another, basically, we have complete physical, like kilometers separated redundancy for all you compute. But if even that is not enough, it automatically fails over to a different region that might be, thousands of kilometers away.
So in short, you have backup in case anything happens. And I think, that's probably a really good reason why, NZXT, they shared this quote with us. They're a global company that builds custom gaming PCs. And they moved from a monolithic stack to a headless front-end solution. And they just gave us, this glowing positivity about how, this was the first year or the first time in their 20-year history with zero downtime. And that literally translates to millions of dollars. So Matt, performance is important and staying up is important. But what are the actual revenue impacts of a migration? Like, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so the big thing to think about when you're looking at like a migration like this is, and this is doing a lot of consuming a lot of Malte's work over the years when we wanted to do core web vitals in previous roles. The first first project that you want to partake in when you're doing a performance project is to understand your data. And I'm going to drop in a tool here for folks to take a look. Correctviz.withgoogle.com is where this is derived from one of our customers. In this customer, what they had earlier in the year was pretty much everything in the red, and everything here is the core web vitals. So the most significant here is going to be cumulative layout shift. So this is the one that was the worst. We spoke earlier that's about 2.8 seconds. That's about, it was, could go even higher. And what this customer had earlier this year, while we were starting to work with them, was a really, really, really bad case of client-side testing. And they would do a bunch of tests on the client side because they could not test on the server side. They could not do A/B testing at the edge, which is what we like to do at Vercel. So what happened is a page loads, there's a bunch of junk that gets added onto the page, and things are shifting around like crazy. What this customer did was they went from a client-side rendered page to a server-side rendered page. Took a lot of work to get to that point, to get to up and running, a lot of back and forth. We worked really closely with the team, but you can see in about 5 months, they went from all red to all green. And this now actually is the real part where we can talk about revenue, because now we actually know black their revenue was X and their site was really poorly performing. Now they're all in the green and their revenue has gone up tremendously. They just had the best Black Friday in their company's history. And it's a long, old storied company with lots of Black Friday histories, lots of big deals and swings in the economy and things. And the biggest change that took place in their company history was reducing cumulative layout shift and reducing client-side experimentation and using Vercel's Edge network to deploy their application.
Yeah, thanks for taking us through that. And I think what's really awesome about hearing this story is that this is just one optimization that they made, and there's still so much more to be done to improve performance even more. But seeing this type of result after making that switch is incredible. So I want to open it up to another poll question and just get everybody's take on how long you think a migration to headless would take. So, within 6 months, within 1 year, within 2 years, over 2 years. Would just love to get a sense of like what you're currently thinking a migration looks like. And while we're getting those poll results back in, Malte, I'd love to ask you, what your thoughts are on what the best way to approach a migration is. Like, what have you seen to be successful? And if you're starting to take those first steps, what would you think through first?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I already went through this in some detail, but like basically migration should always be incremental. Migration should, and the way to think about it is you can either do separate your application into functionality that kind of stands next to each other and do one of them at a time. And you can look at the vertical stack and only change parts of it at a time, right? So like if, for example, you have an existing monolith, don't get rid of it. Just put something new in front as the new head, so to say. And that requires you then to not have to change all these other things, right? And so those things are really what really drives better results in migrations.
Yeah, and Matt, I would love for you to walk us through what a migration can actually look like on Vercel. I mean, this is a plan that you worked on with a customer recently. So what are we seeing here? And walk us through this process.
Yeah, so the customer who we showed their core web vitals earlier in the drop, this was their exact migration plan. And there's a blog that we're also going to share inside of here that has a really detailed migration plan that was written out last year. The idea here is, like we've been talking about, is we're not going to boil the ocean. We're not going to do like a giant light switch and everyone's going to work for 6 months in the dark, and then we're going to turn the light switch on and everything's going to be great, and Vercel's going to save the day. What we want to do is slowly prove out what's going on and slowly but surely move from one system to another. And the idea here is we're going to keep the monolith for certain pages while we continue to move out. When I initially brought this to the customer, their idea was actually to bring checkout up front. I originally said, let's do the home page first. And they said, actually, no, there's too much marketing attribution. We don't want to mess with that. Let's just get checkout completely dialed in. And let's figure out how checkout's going to work. All of these other pages, as you can see here, are still running on the CDN only, but everything below these in the white boxes in the middle is actually what went over to Vercel afterwards. So it wasn't all like I said, it's not a giant light switch. We're going to slowly but surely incrementally move these things through. And what makes this really powerful is that we can prove out what's going on very quickly. We can say like, okay, checkout wasn't working because XYZ happened. Let's fix this. Oh, we had a rendering method that was misconfigured, and we fixed it, and now things are going great. If you do giant light switch methodology, you might not figure that out for months because there's too many things to untangle. The other side of this is when we slowly continue to go work through this, we can now expand our roadmap to do different things. And we can expand out to do things with AI, like we were talking about before. We can do different client-side, or we can do a different server-side experiment things way earlier than having to wait until all of our work is done. So what we did was around halfway through, we started doing a little bit more experimentation because we actually had certain pages on Vercel and we didn't have to do client-side experimentation. The last piece that I want to kind of talk about on this is when we did get to Vercel at 100%, this is when we actually didn't like have amazing gains like overnight because we were slowly getting more gains as we kept things coming on over. So if you go back to that chart from earlier, you can actually see that the chart slides down over time and it continues to slide down as more things are on Vercel. So it wasn't like, again, giant light switch is a lot more risky because you're going to be losing that bounce rate battle for all of that whole time. And then when you turn the light switch on, then it will drop. Or it might not drop. So here's when we actually continue to have slow gains over time. The last piece on this is relying on the Vercel developer experience platform. So having those preview environments, having the builds be really, really fast allowed our development team to really iterate quickly on this project and really know what was going on. We weren't doing any guesswork during this whole thing.
Yeah, thanks for walking us through that. And I think the main thing is, getting to work with Vercel and our team of experts to help navigate these decisions and make those suggestions. So I'd love to ask one more poll question. Would you be interested in discussing a path to headless with our experts? And we'll definitely be following up with you. But Malte, I wanted to ask you for folks here that are interested in taking their first steps, what resources do we have here at Vercel? Why work with us, and why get started today?
Totally. So, I mean, the number one thing we have is we have all kinds of templates and accelerators that gets you from 0 to 80%. So you don't have to like implement all the best practices yourself. I already shared a blog post and we'll share it later about incremental migrations. We have lots of documentation there that are more specifically for how to do headless migrations to Vercel as well. And then maybe the final thing is that we do have a professional services team that we don't like randomly deploy to our customers for all kinds of things, but we do specifically use them as a resource for you to help you do migrations. So you can augment your existing either in-house engineering resources or an agency you might be working with, etc., with our own kind of expert that consult them into how to do the lowest risk, highest efficiency migration.
Yeah, definitely. And, we've talked about a lot here. I want to bring up some highlights. I think the main takeaways here are that site performance during high traffic events are super critical, and your monolith could actually be the reason that your performance is being held back. And if you took nothing else away from our conversation, I want to leave you with this. And it is that you can experience these types of performance gains without spending 3 years on a migration. You can actually start seeing those results within 6 months. And I think with how much opportunity there is in online shopping only continuing to increase year over year, if you're not taking the steps to optimize your site, you could be missing out big time. So before I open it up to Q&A, I wanted to take a quick moment to highlight that there's a lot of opportunities for us to continue the conversation and work with Vercel on your specific migration questions and situation. So I wanted to highlight that we're going to be at NRF this year, and I would love for you to come see us in person in New York. You can register there for any of the events that we're hosting with the QR code. And if you can't make it in person, we're hosting another virtual event in January with A6 front-end platforms manager, and they're going to share their decision on why they went headless. We're going to cover their migration from their Salesforce Commerce Cloud monolith, and we'll highlight the performance gains that they saw after making the switch. So this should be a really fun conversation. So I hope you join us, and we'll send details as soon as we have them. And I'm going to open up the floor for questions. So I would love to see what we have here. I'm just looking through the chat.
So there's one that came through. I can read it out loud. And Malta, you can kind of work on this one with me. Is one of the issues that this person sees with the flexible architecture and moving headless that spans beyond various services is there is no control over the security of those disjointed systems. How do we trust and address that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I can't answer it in its totality because there's many aspects. But one thing that I do want to highlight is what folks are doing, especially on the monolith, where they say, okay, I need something to do analytics. I need something to do advertising tracking. I need to optimize conversion rate on my cart. I have an affiliate system. I do experimentation. The classic way of integrating all of these technologies is by dropping a piece of JavaScript into your site, which then gets full security access to your client's cookie jar and allows the like can do whatever they want basically, right? And so that's kind of the classic way of doing it. If you instead have your own front end that you control as a flexible way to integrate these third-party services, it is actually a better way of having kind of controllability of what's actually going on your site. So I think like there's always trade-offs, but I think from a having like owning the integration point, so to say, is the first step to actually being able to have tight security over kind of living with the and working around the inflexibility of a monolith architecture.
Yeah, I love that. Other thing to add on would be to take a look at our firewall feature. So having Vercel as the tip of the spear, all of your requests are going to flow through our firewall. So there's another way to also kind of think of it there is like, and we have, like Malte said earlier, the fastest firewall in the industry. So this is where having that extra layer of security there. We also have another line of products around security where you can connect securely to backends through VPC peering. That's going to be Vercel Secure Compute as well. So that's another line where you can actually connect securely into a backend as well. So yeah, Alina, I'll let you ask the questions then too.
Yeah, I'm actually just oh, I see one here. In your experience, what's the common time window for a migration? What are the usual problems which delay the process?
I would say that the right now is the absolute best time. I know with NRF coming up in January, this is oftentimes a lot of customers will start making their decisions on how platforms look now. And it usually takes about 6 months to get going on certain things. And again, it could take up to 6 months, or it could be as short as a month or two if you're only going to slice off certain parts of your site and use the monolith for other pieces of your application. I don't know, Malta, do you have any hot takes on when to do this?
I mean, I think when is I don't have any hot takes, right? Like whenever it works for you. Um, I think
Now.
you just gotta look at your business calendar. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Malta, maybe another question for you is, when you're pulling together all the pieces to start talking about making a migration, there is a hefty change management portion of this. And so as CTO, like, what are your suggestions for folks that are trying to start the process of getting everybody on board and pitching why this would be such a good idea? Like, how do we start that?
Sorry, I had connections problems. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I mean, from a change management standpoint, like getting everybody on the same page and starting that migration, like pulling out tech aside from the problem, like how do we pitch to, somebody like a CTO on why this is a good idea?
Yeah, in a way, the CTO pitch is by far the easiest, right? I think the main thing that I find really attractive in a headless architecture is that I have this combination of being in control of the experience and being in control of effectively the routing through the application, but also taking advantage of existing best of breed technologies, right? And so that I think that's an incredibly good fit. On the other hand, I think it's much more important to not focus so much on the technology only, like I'm saying that as a CTO, and basically see like what are my business goals? How can I achieve these business goals, and what's the best technology to actually implement them? And there, obviously, um, you can, there's, I mean, we do all kinds of kind of total cost of ownership studies, lots of case studies, etc., of the progress that people are seeing.
Yeah, I think that that's good. And maybe a hot take question here, but in your opinion, is a migration ever fully done or considered done?
Yes. No, my hot take is really like migrations are special, right? Like you have a goal, you get them done, and then you go like are you done, with everything? No, of course not. Like you have more plans, but I think you actually want to design migrations in such a way that you understand when they're done, and then you move on to actually iterating on the things that you care about.
Yeah, I think maybe that's the piece that I'm pointing at. What are those types of iterations? You do one optimizations, you do one optimization, that's the first part of the migration. But then you continue to find these optimizations, you continue to make these incremental improvements. Like, how long does that time span typically look like? Like what have you seen on average?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I what I would advocate for, right, is everyone should be shipping one improvement on your site at least once a day. And maybe you can achieve it, but then twice a week. But you should like basically the goal is of having kind of a pipeline of things, right? And being able to guide them by feature flags so that you can run experimentation on them and you can know in a scientific way whether you're actually moving forward. Alina,
Uh,
there's a question in the Q&A that I would love to address. And uh, can it sometimes be a slower experience when headless? For example, when rendering everything on the front end, is a hybrid approach sometimes better? What I would love to pitch here is, so I mean, I would say it's never slower with headless. Now, obviously, you can always write about that program, right? Like no one's stopping you from it. But there's no architectural reasons for why a headless solution should ever be slower than a monolith. Um, what like Next.js and Vercel bring to the table is that you actually have a lot of flexibility of where rendering is happening. So we support like fully cached responses. If you're not personalization, we support with our middleware technology and deep integration into Next.js that experimentation can be executed on the edge and then go into multiple cached versions, which are hosted under the same URL, so they always have fast experiences. And then the final technology that is being developed in Next.js as we speak, but on the infrastructure side on Vercel is fully stable, is that we support a technology called PPR, partial pre-rendering. So in that technology, you have the same page delivered in a single server response with both static parts that are delivered from the edge and dynamic parts which are delivered from wherever you host your compute and your data. And so we call that kind of the final rendering approach because it fully combines the benefits of static edge delivery and dynamic delivery in a single rendering model. So you never have to make compromise. You can always choose which one to use based on the particular need of any part of your page.
Yeah, I love that. Um, okay, I think we are running out of time here. So unless there's any more questions that we see in the chat that we haven't gotten to, I would love to take a few minutes to thank our hosts. Thank you so much for Matt and Malta for spending some time with us today. This has been an awesome session, and we're going to be sure to share the recording with you all as soon as we have it, likely this week. For the poll questions that we asked, we'll be sure to get in touch with you and follow up. And we'll send you all of the resources that we shared in this conversation today. But again, big thanks to Malte and Matt. Big thank you to all of you for showing up all around the world. We really love having this conversation with you, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.